Today I have with me Sean Taylor, Marwin Spiller, and Jamila K. Wilson. I'm Shama St. Louis, and we're going to open up the conversation today by recapping some of the things that happened last year that we think brings about an important topic for this year, for 2015. And one of those things were, or several of those things were, the incident in Ferguson, the incident with Eric Gardner and Tamir Rice. And as a result of those different incidents, I feel like that caused, an outrage among our people, and a lot of young leaders began to spring up and, do things to take action. So as far as starting marches and protesting and really speaking out against the things that are negatively affecting our Black community. So with that being said, I have a question here that I would like to ask and, get my co-host thoughts on, and that is, how do we define Black leadership in a post-racial America? Let's start with Sean.
I think defining Black leadership, first of all, post-racial America, you kind of have to put that in air quotes, because as we all know, things are not really post-racial. Everyone sees race, whether you're Black, white, or green. But I define it as someone who is disciplined enough and comfortable enough to be themselves and to empower their children or their community, wherever they're at, and to bring about change that they think is for the better good of the community and for the nation at large.
Okay.
I think I would have to agree with that. I would add that you have to have the trust of the people. You have to have the trust of the people. You have to be about the issues that are relevant to the uplift, as Sean spoke about, to be considered a Black leader. And I'll come back to that. I have more to say about that later.
Okay.
Yeah, so for me, the state of Black leadership in quote-unquote post-racial America is what more progressive voices like Glenn Ford would identify as a misleadership class. So there are leaders, but they're not necessarily representing the needs of the masses of Black folk. That instead of addressing the major issues of unemployment amongst the Black community, addressing the issues of education, healthcare, mass incarceration, their conversations are more centered around how finance capital can be protected, or how Israel is able to maintain its settlements over in Palestine. So there are leaders, but they're not addressing the issues of our people. And so again, they're what we're calling, or what Glenn Ford, who is the editor of the Black Agenda Report, is calling this misleadership class.
Okay, well, with that being said, Jamila, they're being leaders, but they aren't addressing, the things that really matter, such as unemployment rates and a lot of the social injustices that we're having. What do you, or who do you consider to be a Black leader today?
I'll say the young people in Ferguson. The young people in Ferguson, for me, represent what our leadership class is emerging, what that looks like. These are young people who have been disregarded for a long time, they've been dismissed, and they are still human beings, and they are feeling the pressures of the oppression by the state, with the police attacking them, with the school system not educating them but teaching them to a test that is already biased, with a system that's seeking to incarcerate them as opposed to educate them. And when they saw one of their own lying dead in the street for 4 hours in the August sun, it was just sort of like, a snap, something going off and saying this can no longer happen. That if we're going to create change, we're going to have to do it ourselves. And that's the reality of where we are right now. So, leadership for Black people has always sort of come from the masses itself as opposed to a self-appointed. And we need to go back to that level of developing from within the masses as opposed to saying, you are the leader.
So would you guys agree then, based off of what Jamila is saying, that the leaders that we do have today would be self-appointed leaders and not necessarily leaders that have, kind of sprung up from some type of, incident as far as like Ferguson or anything like that? Would this be like someone who just pretty much got up one day and said, okay, I'm going to pick up this cause or take up this issue?
Well, I think it's twofold. 'Cause I think that, on the one hand, I think that the Black community have changed. In the 60s, 70s, there was a Black community because of segregation that confined Black people on the whole to a community. But with the successes of the Civil Rights Movement, Black people were able to move out of those communities, talking about the middle class, the upper middle class, leaving behind a group that could not leave, so you segregated the community. And so to talk about a Black leader today, certainly Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton appealed to some segments of the community. President Obama appealed to some segments of the community, but not other segments of the community. And likewise, we can go across the board. I mean, certainly in Ferguson, for example, you had the NAACP that led a march from Ferguson to Missouri State Capitol. Certainly that was an instance where that leadership wasn't embraced by the broader community today in a way that perhaps would have been embraced 30, 40 years ago. And so certainly we have to take that into account.
Okay. Why do you think it's not being embraced like it was? What is different about who the young people today, or who we are today, that is making it so that they aren't as receptive to these types of issues and joining in? Or do you feel like they are receptive?
Well, I think that young people are focused on getting money. I think most of Americans are focused on jobs and finances, and that we've adopted the capitalist mindset, whereas in the 50s and 60s, we were just fighting to get into the game. And now, for the most part, we've gotten into the game, although that there's still, the elegant, sort of elusive racism that keeps us behind as a Black community. There's a lot of Black folks that are doing very, very well for themselves, and not just well in the sense of the Black community, but as far as being multi-millionaires and even billionaires, global icons, and really able to affect change on a massive scale. There's more of an entertainment culture, we all know that. So you have someone like a Jay-Z, Sean Carter, that can be considered a leader in the Black community. And even though he's not leading marches, he is meeting with city representatives and politicians and putting money into certain communities where Black folks reside to affect that change. So I think that young people have definitely been skewed more towards commercialism and capitalism, and the civil rights issues of the 50s and 60s, those just aren't coming back.
So then, okay.
Well, yeah, I want to kind of veggie back on that, not piggyback, but veggie back on it. That I think we also need to take a level of onus that we've dropped the ball. That those, as Marwin referenced, who are able to, under the successes of affirmative action, were able to leave Black communities and go over to what they assumed were greener pastures, literally left those Black folk behind and chose to carve out space for themselves and their families. And I've had conversations before with veterans of the Civil Rights Movement who are honest when they say we've dropped the ball. We've not maintained our connection to the masses of Black folks that are still suffering under poverty. So like when the 70s and 80s were happening and there was the, deregulation under Reagan, Reagan, and there was the deindustrialization, under starting with Nixon in the late 60s, that we left those black people behind. And we know, whether we want to admit it or not, but in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, drugs were inundated in our community. Weapons were inundated in our community. Weapons from the Vietnam War were found in these urban spaces, and they just didn't happen there, magically. So we did not hold the powers that be accountable. In fact, we became a part of that powers that be class, and have left us. So it does not surprise me that the young people would be like, nah, Jesse, you don't speak for me. No, Al, keep it moving.
Yeah.
So that would be, like no shade to the baby boomers, but shade to the baby
But
boomers.
shade to the baby boomers,
Because,
right? 'Cause
yeah,
they know.
I kind of, I feel you on that, because I kind of feel like that too. I feel like the baby boomer generation is like to me, one of the only generations that I can think of that did not leave things substantially better for the next generation. Mm-hmm. And then you have, the next generation, and before there's even a whole nother generation, you have those people having babies, you know what I mean? So then you have like this collide, of generations mixing in. You have the baby boomers who pretty much, they still want to be superstars. Like they're still trying to have their shine. They're still trying to, outwork you when they should be retiring, and you should be the one, getting those opportunities. So it's like, what do you do in that type of situation where pretty essentially, your parents or older brothers and sisters or whatever, based off of your age, these people did not make things substantially better for you. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you dig yourself out of that?
Yeah, but I think that on the one hand, I think you're correct, but on the other hand, I think that we also have to put the onus on that younger generation who is essentially not prepared to take leadership. And so it's one thing to pass the torch, but it's another thing to not be prepared, because to believe that social media and lack of education because it's a new era. No, halls of power have not changed. Those people who influence power are still the same folks, or still influence power the same way they did 20, 30 years ago. So you can believe that the world has changed. But in fact, all of our presidents, all of our judges, our Supreme Court judges, the vast majority of our senators are from Ivy League institutions with pedigree that is not that of
boo-boo down the street.
Correct. And so you got to be prepared to take the mantle in this new context. And I just don't think that young people are.
Well, can I say something about that? Because I feel like that's still baby boomers' fault, in my opinion, because I feel like when you're going to hand something down to the next generation, you're responsible for making sure that they're prepared to then take the torch, in my opinion. And I don't think they did any of that. I think, it was a very selfish era, a very selfish time.
And I think we do know that there are individuals that do try to bridge that gap, which is important. So, not discounting the whole generation.
Yeah, I don't want to indict the whole group.
Right, but
indict them.
But when we are, talking about the masses and the collective, and looking at the data and looking at, where we are now, then, there has to be some level of accountability, and I think it's important that we do put that accountability on those who fought this fight before, who know the signs and saw this, the writing on the wall, and to have prepared. As it's almost as if we went to sleep or something, like we're in a lull, and these young people are saying, nope, the fight still continues. We are still inundated by oppression by the state under police brutality. We are still the last ones to get hired and the first ones fired. Our numbers speak on that. So this still needs to be addressed.
Yeah, but we are also experiencing a situation where we have increased college graduation entrance rates, and that black folks are going to college at higher rates than ever before. They're not graduating, but they're going. And so, again, it's a matter of preparation. And I think that we have to encourage our young people to get prepared, that if you want, the mantle is there for you to take, but you have to be prepared.
Right.
You have to do what you need to do to be prepared and not
What's the
necessarily...
process of being prepared?
The process
What's
of...
the information that we need to know?
I mean, when I think about the information you need to know is that we need to know that the world have not radically changed. Those things that mattered 20, 30 years ago still matter today. That, yes, we are tweeting, and so we're speaking in 160 characters, but most people expect you to speak in complete sentences. If you want to, at least you got to know how. You have to be able to communicate across all ranges of folks, and I just don't think that the culture encourages that. There's a sense that we are living in this world where it's all about tweeting, it's all about texting, but that's not where power lies.
You're listening to Speak Up, and I am here with Sean Taylor, Marvin Spiller, and Jamila K. Wilson. I'm Shama St. Louis, and currently we are discussing what the state of black leadership is in the era of post-racial America. So before we went to break, Marvin was talking about preparation or lack thereof of the next generation to actually be able to carry that torch. So you want to go ahead and finish?
No, that was, I think we definitely have to do a better job of encouraging our young people what's required for leadership, that once you take that mantle, you want to be able to run. And so I think that, others would agree or disagree on the panel about that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Marvin was saying. First, I wanted to go back to what defines a black leader. I didn't really give a shout out to all the black leaders in the community that are doing the community work, that are on the ground,
Right.
The mentors, the coaches, the preachers. I was fortunate to have several in my life that helped me to be successful. So, I don't want to discount or take anything away from them because they're very, very important. It's not just about the people that you see on TV or hear on the radio. But to Marvin's point about young people not being prepared, I think he's absolutely right. And I think part of the reason why they're not prepared is because, to Marvin's point again, they don't understand that there's rules to this. There's a whole system in place, which is now a global system that's set up for the quote-unquote winners and the losers. The power structures haven't really changed. And I think part of the reason why young people think that the power structures have changed is because every now and then you'll go online and you hear about some 19-year-old who started a company in his basement or his garage and sold it to Google for, $20 million. Mm-hmm. Or, some rapper gets signed for $1 million or $2 million deal, and they have their pants hanging down so other people feel like they can do the same thing. But those are exceptions to the rule. Those are people who are uniquely talented and just highly dynamic people. And as much as all of us like to think that we're those people, the vast majority of us are not, and that's what makes them exceptional. And it's like when I used to coach basketball, these kids want to be the next LeBron James. And I'm like, nobody's the next LeBron James. Like, there's one LeBron James. There's one Kobe Bryant. There's one Michael Jordan. There's, 24 people in the All-Star game coming up soon, 12 from each conference, and there's 300-plus people in the NBA. So the vast majority of the people are what you would call role players, or really good, or some of them aren't very good, but they're still getting paid, and they still put in their dues. They still show up to practice. They still work extremely hard. They do all their media obligations. So they're playing their position. I think a lot of young people have seen the glitz and the glam, and they don't understand that everyone's got a position and that there's rules to the game and that there is a game.
Right.
Now, are we willing to change the game?
Yeah.
So I know that what's the next question?
How do we cultivate the next generation of leaders?
Right. For me, I think it's a dual process that we do need to help these young people understand what the game is, but also let them know that currently the world is in a process of a paradigm shift. Like the game is shifting. It's happening in Greece. It's happening in Spain. It's happening in Africa. The fact that Mugabe out in Zimbabwe is, one, still alive, and two, now the leader of the African Union, that's a game changer. And those are the things that we should be preparing our young people and educating them about. I know there were a contingent of young folk from the Dream Defenders, from Black Lives Matter, from Ferguson, who went to Palestine a month ago and was understanding and learning what those dynamics that are going on in Palestine with the Palestinian people, and seeing the connections of what's happening in Ferguson, what's happening in Brooklyn, what's happening in Peoria is very similar to what's going on in Palestine. So, how do we prepare them for that reality, that we are in the 21st century, the very first 15 years of the 21st century, and what they do and what we do will impact what happens in the next 50 years into the next century. And so, the game is changing, but we also need to know what that game is and what the alternatives are.
Right. And I'm sorry, I definitely agree that the game is changing, but in order to change the game, once again, you have to know the rules of the game. In order to break the rules, you have to know them first. So it's like if, musically you want to break the rules, you want to spit a certain amount of bars, or like with Dave Brubeck in the great jazz album Time Out, he goes on a different count, but that's because he knows the original count. Jay-Z can flip things up on rap, or Biggie when he was alive, because they were true lyricists and they understood how to really rap. But when people can, go on Fruity Loops or whatever they're using now and just come up with a beat and just think that they're going to spit something out and you can put it online and it can get 1 million views, then there's a lack of respect for the process. And if there's a lack of respect for the process, then there's a lack of respect for the rules of the game, and you're going to get washed out. And the thing is, the people that are running the game, they have a lot of resources and they can wait you out. They can wait you out for a long time, or they can use your talent to capitalize, and you're hot for a minute and you're gone tomorrow. Meanwhile, they're still running the game because they're in the positions of power.
I think to kind of ride off of what you're saying too, it all boils down to exposure. And
Absolutely.
I think one of the main problems with our community is that our young people have such a gross lack of exposure to what's out there, what they can become, what they can get into, the different types of careers, just different types of majors. We always hear the same things over and over. A teacher, a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, and not to downplay any of those professions because they're all needed. But at the end of the day, there's so much more out there that other races have exposure to that I feel like our children don't. So in my opinion, to cultivate, the next leader, or, to bring up another generation of leaders, they have to have that exposure so that they understand what's out there and where they fit in that puzzle. Because you're right, everybody won't be LeBron. There's only one LeBron. There's only one Michael Jordan. But you can, find your niche or blaze a trail within your own specific area if you understand that the things that you have going on inside of you, there is room for that.
Exactly.
This is what it's called. Here is the direction you go for that. And I feel like our children, we don't get that.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, and I would just add perhaps an unpopular position in that I think that we're going to see, in my opinion, much stronger, focused leadership with the change of leadership in the White House, in the Black community, in large part because I think that the issues that are impacting our community and impacting young people are so clear and massive in terms of unemployment. You mentioned in terms of incarceration, the issues that are happening around the world. I think with internet, people are tuned into those things. But when you talk about leadership, you have to raise those issues and then challenge the powers that be to change those issues. But when the powers that be represent a person that you have such respect and admiration for, I think the crisis of black leadership is that how do you push for change with a White House that you're so enamored with? How do you do that? Because the civil rights movement challenged LBJ to change. They pushed him. How do we push this current president to do those things without being highly critical of him, without providing fodder for the Fox, for the Republican wing, but yet hold him accountable? And I just don't think that black leadership have figured out how to do that yet. And I think that once President Obama is out of office, our leadership can be more emboldened. Young black folks can be more emboldened. The civil rights wing can be more emboldened, but I just don't think that we are able to do that right now with President Obama in office. And I don't say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's just what it is.
Is Obama black kryptonite? Is he the black man's
Hold on.
kryptonite?
So essentially, what you're saying is that black people are pretty much scared to challenge, or they feel some kind of they're impartial to Obama or to our current president because he's black. So they're not really pushing him to do the things that they would push a white president to do. So you're saying that with the usher in of a white president, then that will give our people what they need to go ahead and push the issues.
What I'm saying is that if you're going to define leadership, leadership is about advocating for change. It's about changing the status quo. It's about leading people around issues that are important to your community. And so therefore you have to demand, or you have to demand something from the existing power structure. I mean, again, the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, they challenged the government, pushed the government to do better. Even the Black Caucus have struggled with how do you push this president without sort of upsetting the sentiment of the community for the love of this president. I mean, and I think with him out the way, that would just be a little easier.
I'm sorry. But, I mean, and once again, Martin and the other civil rights leaders, they had tangible goals. They had identifiable goals, concrete goals to say this is exactly what we want. Right. And they were part of the reason they were able to do that is because it affected their everyday life. Mm-hmm. I mean, across the board. Right. But now you have, yes, black men are getting murdered in crazy numbers. The mass incarceration in the industrial prison complex. But you have a lot of black people that aren't directly affected by that. Mm-hmm. President Obama, if he never was president, he probably would never be affected by that because he's Ivy League educated. His wife is Ivy League educated. Right. His circle is highly educated. Right.
Well, he recently talked about, being identified as the wait staff, that he does engage and deal with levels of, right, prejudice, racism, things like that. I don't think there are very many black people that are separated from that experience.
Right, and it's kind of like we talked about offline. Like someone being ignorant and mistaking you for the waitstaff, that's like not illegal. That's their opinion, that's their ignorance. But you not being able to vote, that is a right. So when MLK said we want to be able to vote, we want to be able to have jobs and opportunities, those were tangible things. So yeah, Obama
we don't want to be attacked by the people that are supposed to protect and serve us that we're actually paying to protect and serve us.
Right, but what I'm saying is President Obama is not experiencing that. If he was just Barack Obama, the Columbia graduate, Harvard graduate, he's probably not going to experience that, and his children are not going to experience that.
Well,
So,
we do remember, though, in the beginning of Obama's presidency, Dr. Louis Henry Gates
Right.
was accosted in front of his house by
Right.
the Cambridge police,
Right.
that even as an Ivy League, he too still experienced the ills of racism in this country. So,
Right.
the elite Negro or black person is not devoid of the reality of our experience.
they're not, but that was an exception. Once again, like we talked about exceptions. Henry Louis Gates, yes, he talked about, DWB driving while black, and yes, someone, mistook him for an intruder at his home, but that's not his everyday reality. People, these are our communities that are devastated, these black communities that have crazy unemployment, crazy incarceration, crazy violent crime. This is affecting them on a visceral level every second of their life. That's their cousins, husbands, uncles that are going to jail and being murdered.
Yeah, but I think that when we talk about what happened after the Ferguson, when those young people were brought to Washington by Reverend Al Sharpton, I think that in standing before the Capitol, the next step is now we need to move this street action to legislative action, which means
Right.
now we have to push the White House to do something. But how
Right.
do you do that when Al Sharpton's in the White House every day? That's
Right.
his friend, that's his homie. So now I need to demand you, where in the 60s and 70s you didn't have that.
That's
and I
my
think with
point.
another person in office, we will be less beholden to that, and we can go to the next level.
I know
push.
things are getting a little heated up, but we have to wrap it up. I'd like to thank all of our listeners for tuning in and listening to Speak Up. Thank you to Sean, Marwin, and Jamila for today's discussion. Remember, speak up, speak out, and your voice matters.
Please don't let me be less on this love.